Hello, BookTube. I had an appointment bitterly early this morning, as usual. It was postponed because of snow, then it was postponed because of rain. But this morning there was nothing at all. This morning there was no grounds for postponement. So I was on my merry way at the crack of dawn. And as usual, that appointment finished up right around the time when shops were opening, the few shops that are open in Boston. And one of those is the Brattle Bookshop in downtown Boston. For those of you who are new to this channel, and as far as I can tell, there are a couple of hundred new people to this channel. The Brattle Bookshop is a used bookstore in downtown Boston. It's very old. And I have been a customer there for a very long time. Very, very long time. And it's 3 stories. The first 2 are every used book you can imagine for reasonable prices and well-lit marble-floored aisles. And then the 3rd floor is antique and collectible things that are more pricey and that are the kind of thing that a collector would want or that you might want as a gift for somebody. And the stock changes all the time. The Brattle is out all the time doing buys. They're one of the only people who still do it, and they'll give you a good, fair price for a room full of stuff that you don't want, and you just want it gone. And that makes it a great used bookstore anyway, but they also have a sale lot next door. The whole lot where would be the floor plan of another building is open to the sky next door. And the Brattle has for years filled that with bargain books. $1, $3, and $5 bargain books, most of which are in excellent condition. So it's not a lot of used bookstores will put out a barrel or two of books outside that are junk, and they're falling apart, they're waterlogged, they're bloated or stained or incomplete or something like that. And the bookstores that do that put their junk outside, do that for a couple of reasons. I think one of the main reasons is that they're just worried about theft. They're just worried people are going to run off with this stuff. One way or another, the Brattle doesn't think that way, and I doubt they have much of a problem in that regard. Instead, they just put out stuff of all descriptions, thousands of books, not just 2 carts, but thousands of them, 2 whole walls and 24 carts on wheels, of all kinds of books in all descriptions with no organization whatsoever. So it's a browser's paradise. You don't know what you're going to find from day to day. You don't know what, even if you make a meticulous job of going over every one of those carts outside, as I sometimes do, there you are guaranteed to miss things. And you go back the next day, you'll see things on those same carts. Even though the stock hasn't been rotated, you'll see things you didn't see the day before. And I needed the pick-me-up, so I went to the Brattle. It was a beautiful day. It was not even really cold. And it looks like it's going to be almost warm tomorrow. So I'm just hoping that I don't get a call for another bitterly early morning visit, because as much as I love browsing at the Brattle, I would much rather be reading on the couch with my little bean, who's forlornly looking at me now because she wants to go for a walk, and I agree we should. But first, I want to show you the books I got. I got a pile of books, and as usual, we will start with murder mysteries because March Mystery Madness, a great BookTube event, is right around the corner, a week away. And we'll be in March for March of the Mammoths and March of the Moderns and Middle Grade March and also March Mystery Madness, where your fellow hosts and I are just celebrating murder mysteries and all their permutations all month long. And even before I was going to do that for March, I was still interested in murder mysteries. 2020 sort of revived my interest in reading them. And the Brattle has a large selection of them. So the first 3 books I want to show you are murder mysteries, starting with a mass market paperback. The mass market paperbacks are dirt cheap. All of these things really were dirt cheap. And I used them as a way to explore authors that I've never heard about, series that I've never even seen. And this is one of them. This is an Inspector Rudd mystery by June Thompson called Death Cap. And then you have our detective on the cover, but you also have mushrooms, which is going to be the key to everything here. Armed with a copy of British Mushrooms and Toadstools, Inspector Rudd sets out to unravel a most genteel murder. One of Mrs. Renee King's acquaintances has managed to slip her a Mickey, in this case a batch of deadly poisonous mushrooms, the infamous Death Cap. And he has to solve the crime. I gather from reading a bit of the beginning that he has a rather humdrum desk job as a detective and relishes the idea to get out into the field and solve a murder. But I've never heard of this author before. If any of you have, if any of you by chance have read Death Cap, feel free to let me know how you would characterize it. It sounds to me like a kind of police procedural, and that's okay by me. That's absolutely okay by me. So what do we want to do for ergonomics here? Okay, the next one is this author's name came up just recently on this channel, and the Brattle karma is like that, where you will be thinking about something bookish, or you'll be looking at your shelves and you'll be thinking, oh, you know, I don't have that volume anymore. I wonder if I'll ever see it again. And then it will show up at the Brattle. That happens a lot. The Brattle karma is very real. The only caution that I would issue about it is that you can't push it. If you go to the Brattle looking for something, especially the Brattle sale lot, then you won't find it, and you won't find anything else. But just the other day on this channel, I mentioned an author. I was talking about how fame fades, and how authors who were once incredibly popular can be totally unknown to another generation of readers. And I mentioned E. Phillips Oppenheim, who wrote indefatigably. He wrote an enormous number of books, and they were all hits. They were absolutely all hits. They were all novels. They're very glitzy and glamorous and easy to read. They're so much fun. They are the definition of smart, light fiction. Or they were in their day, a century ago. And he was such an institution that at the time, if you'd asked a bookseller anywhere in Boston or New York or London, if you'd asked a bookseller, okay, is there going to come a time when not only is he not going to have any books in print, but that no one's going to know his name, they're not even going to remember his name, any of those book clerks would have said, no, that absolutely cannot happen. Even if some of his books go out of print, by that point he'll be taught in schools, so it won't matter. People will still know his name. And that isn't true. It absolutely isn't true. And although there is often a crime at the heart of an Oppenheim book, even critics in his own day were hesitant to call him a mystery author, but I'm going to include him for March Mystery Madness, because if there's a crime, then it's crime writing. And March Mystery Madness is designed for fun. So you want a thriller in there, you want a police procedural, you want a crime novel of some kind, even a suspense novel, that's okay. It fits. And I found an omnibus, Spies and Intrigues, a Secret Service omnibus by E. Phillips Oppenheim, that has, here you have a London omnibus. So it's quite literally an omnibus volume. You have people, they're all reading Oppenheim. And this has The Great Impersonation, The Wrath to Come, Gabriel Samara, Peacemaker, and Mr. Billingham, the Marquis and Madeline. So it has 4 works, one of which I believe is a collection of interconnected short stories. This is the second Oppenheim omnibus. The first one wasn't this big, but it was a huge hit. A huge hit. And I saw this at the Brattle and grabbed it right away because I don't have any Oppenheim. But I was hoping, another thing about the Brattle karma is that sometimes you will benefit from the fact that the Brattle has gone out on a buy to one person. I find it hard to believe that the person who had this book didn't have the first omnibus. And if they did, then it will probably turn up. And I would love them both. But I very much take this. I'm sure I haven't read. I doubt I've read even half of Oppenheim. I doubt I have. I'm sure that I haven't read any of the books in here. So we'll give it a try. He was hugely lionized in his day by authors who are also forgotten. Just the other day, in fact, here on this channel, we mentioned John Buchan. The Hannay stories that I showed you on the Library Tour of Doom, I think it was. They are terrific reading. And Buchan thought the world of Oppenheim. He thought he was a terrific writer. If you'd have asked Buchan, he'd have said, no, my works might fade, but his certainly will not. He even had one of the greatest writer tributes to another writer that I have ever read, which is, Buchan called him the greatest writer since the prophet Elijah, the greatest Jewish writer since the prophet Elijah. I don't know that I'd go quite that far, but nevertheless, this was a treat to find. I won't read all 4 of these things at the same time, but that was a treat. I'm going to save it. I'm going to save all of these things, all these mysteries for March. And the next one is something I've had before. I have an e-copy of it. I have had paperbacks of it. I've had hardcovers of it. It is extremely famous. But I got it anyway because I found a UK hardcover, and I just love those I love the design. Just love it. This is Devices and Desires by P.D. James in a Faber and Faber hardcover, so not the normal American hardcover. This is a Dalglish novel where he goes on vacation. He goes on vacation to Norfolk to live in a converted windmill that has been gifted to him by an eccentric aunt. But he can't go anywhere without murder following him. And there is a murderer who is stalking the area, killing young girls. But a crime is committed virtually under his nose when he's there. So he has to deal with it. You know, there's no vacation from that kind of righteousness. That's the kind of sleuth that P.D. James wrote. And I have had this. I had a review copy of this from the American publisher. I had the finished copy from the American publisher. I've had many, many mass market paperbacks here in America. And I had a trade paperback of this Faber and Faber production once upon a time that I think I showed on this channel years ago and got rid of to one of you. One of you said, "Ooh, that's pretty." And I said, well, at the time there was no plague. And at the time I was going out with a crowd of muscular teenagers almost every day to do errands. So I said, fine, I'll pack it up, put it on the pile, send it out to you. I'll certainly see it again. I expected that when I saw it again, I would see it in that paperback, but this is a hardcover. I will absolutely take it. I will also gladly reread it. P.D. James is one of the few mystery authors who really repays rereading. I love rereading her. Just love it. And there are a couple of examples in this Brattle Haul of an author who I left the world of book reviewing for a quarter of a century. And if I hadn't done that, I would have reviewed several of her books. Instead, I only got a chance to review one. And I also wrote her obituary, which is a grim thing for a writer to do. I wrote her obituary for the Washington Post. So at least I got to overlap a little with this author while she was still producing books. That is certainly not true of this next one. Holbrook Jackson was a bookman back when that term had any meaning. He was an indefatigable editor and publisher and a great writer about books. He wrote a whole shelf of little books about books, including one that I think was just called The Pleasure of Reading, that I would love to find. I found today one of his books, Bookmans Pleasure, which is just him. It's sort of a commonplace book of quotes that he pulls from an encyclopedic amount of reading on various subjects. There's a little chapter here on ecstatic praise given to authors, maybe in excess of their worth. There's a little chapter right next to it on damnation given to authors, maybe more than they deserve. And there are all sorts of other things in here. A little chapter on drinking, a little chapter on collecting books, and that kind of a commonplace book is not rare in the books about books world. The thing that sets this apart is that the sources aren't just readily copied from other excerpt books. They're from his reading. So you on every page you're encountering a quote from some author or some work where you've never seen it quoted before, and it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I wish I do have it. Yeah, there's our author. I wish I could find more of his books on reading. I wonder if this gives a list. Does this give a list of other things that I'm looking for? Maybe. Oh, I'm not looking for them. The Fear of Books, I remember that. Anatomy of a Bibliomania. Books on George Bernard Shaw and William Morris. Okay, this one doesn't list The Pleasure of Reading, but I think he did write a book called that, and I would love to find it. Again, I'm hoping that whoever got rid of this to the Brattle maybe got rid of other books by the same author. Then this next one is a treat. It's in a little rough shape, but someone's already put it in one of those plastic covers. So I don't have to deal anything. I don't have to fix it in any way. And it's an author I love that we saw just recently. Yes? Yeah. See, this corner is great for props. It's Edith Hamilton. And on a Brattle Haul just recently, I got this thing, The Greek Way and the Roman Way in one volume. That has been on and off for me an absolute joy to reread. And I'm copying notes into it, so I get to reread it in detail. And this one is Witness to the Truth. This is her book about Christianity and the New Testament. And she was a classicist and she's an elegant stylist in terms of prose, but she was also a very insightful reader of text. And the best kind of Christian in that she didn't view those two things as antithetical to each other. She brings that insightful reading of text to the Gospels, to the Acts, and to the Epistles. And it's wonderful. I haven't read this book in eons. not in eons. I had, I think, a mass market paperback, or maybe even a trade paperback. Oh God, I don't even remember how long ago. This is going to be a treat to rediscover, to just reread this thing. In a nice hardcover. So one by one, bit by bit, I am accumulating a lot of hardcover Edith Hamilton, which is fine by me. Of course, she's the author of Mythology, that sold 1 million copies, just sold 1 million copies, still in print. There's nothing else by Edith Hamilton that's still in print, but Mythology is. And people who know her only from that book will maybe ought to explore a little more, because she is a wonderful guide to the ancient world just in general as a place to start. Then this next volume is right up my alley. This is also an example of an author who lived just long enough for me to review his last book. This is Robert Hughes. And this is a book we've seen on this channel before. This is Nothing If Not Critical. And I got the hardcover because I had this UK trade paperback that I actually don't like. A rare instance where I don't like the UK trade paperback. It's too small and it's too stiff. So it doesn't really work for regular consultation. And it's going to go on this bookshelf. And the books on this bookshelf I do consult regularly. The book, you can't really tell, but the books on this bookshelf right behind Lord Ganesha are all my books of other book critics. Book essays, book prefaces, that sort of thing. I go to them a lot. I go to this bookshelf a lot. And I come to Hughes a lot too. This book, Nothing If Not Critical. I don't have a copy of his book, The Shock of the New. I will find it eventually, but I don't have that. I don't have his book on Australia, The Fatal Shore. And I just recently got rid of his big book, American Visions, to one of you. But I will find it again. I will find all of these things again. But this thing is amazing, because even though I don't care much about a lot of the artists that he writes about in here, these are all reviews of art installations, art shows, art books. This is deadline prose, so the same kind that I write, only much, much better. The first section of this book is on old masters, a handful of them. And I admit, in every copy of this book that I've ever had, that has been the section that I read the most, revisited the most. But he also writes about every major modern artist that you can think of. And he has fierce, bristling opinions on all of them. It's amazing. He keeps my interest on the essays about those artists about whom I know nothing. I don't want to know anything. I think they're frauds. And whether he thinks they're frauds or not, his prose about them is just beguiling. And when he gets around in the modern chapters to an artist that I actually know and like, well, then he's absolutely fascinating for me. I have, oh, there he is. There's our critic. Looking cantankerous, but he was actually easily prone to laughter, easily prone to smiling. But he had an air of orneriness, because he was the last honest man in the gallery. He was the last person in an art gallery who would never jump on a bandwagon, who would never be swayed by hype, and who would never mix his words. And that is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And for those of you who are very young, that huge device behind him is a computer. That is a computer. You stuck floppy disks in there. The screen was black with green letters. The keys were right there. The thing weighed about 70 pounds. You often had to have your desk reinforced. That's a computer. Okay? But I want to read you a bit on one such artist, on Norman Rockwell, who I love. I think he's fantastic. I know that's kind of kitschy, but the great thing about Hughes is that he didn't care where other people ranked an artist. He went at them all just straight away and didn't dismiss anybody until they made him dismiss him. And he writes this about Rockwell. His patient work served to describe, I'm going to try not to do, I'm not going to lapse into his Australian accent. This patient work served to describe a dream world of small-town America. His paintings offer Arcadia. In Rockwell's America, old people were not thrust like palsied, incontinent vegetables into nursing homes by their indifferent offspring. They stayed basking in respect on the porch, apple-cheeked and immortally spry. Kids did not snort angel dust and get one another pregnant. They stole apples and swam in forbidden waterholes, but said grace before meals. All soldiers were nice boys from next door. All politicians were benevolent or harmlessly bumbling. Although Rockwell, faced with the distasteful chore of committing Spiro Agnew's face to the canvas for the cover of TV Guide, once allowed that the disgraced vice president was not quite his type. The great social fact was family continuity, generation on generation. It was a world unmarked by doubt, violence, or greed. The mountainous Thanksgiving turkey that appears in Freedom from Want. It's a very famous Rockwell painting. You might not know the title, but you definitely know the image. The mountainous Thanksgiving turkey that appears in Freedom from Want, one of the paintings of the four freedoms that he made in 1943, is an image of virtuous abundance rather than extravagance. A Puritan tone confirmed by the glasses of plain water on the table. And that is perfect hues. Because you're reading that and you're thinking, okay, well, I might like that painting too, but come on. It's meant to show extravagant abundance. It's a laden table. It's a huge turkey. But only he would notice that the glasses, the refreshments, the beverages on the table are pure water. Wonderful. And that moment of just sharp insight is in everything that he wrote. So I was very happy to find a nice dirt cheap hardcover of this thing to replace my paperback. Because the paperback, I ordinarily love UK trade paperbacks, but in this case it just doesn't hold up. I really shouldn't have, unless you get something like this. This is a UK trade paperback of Clive James's Cultural Amnesia, and it has the old style penguin binding, so it, if anything, is more durable than a hardcover, and certainly more reconsultable than the big clunky American hardcover of that book. So when it comes to a book on this shelf, I really need it to take that kind of punishment. Otherwise, I need to replace it. This next one is historical fiction, 14th century historical fiction, and I have had mass market paperbacks of this thing many times, but I had no idea that it had come out as a hardcover. I must have missed that. This is A Vision of Light by Judith Merkel Riley. A lovely hardcover that just they decided not to crowd it up with anything. And this is the story of a widow woman, Margaret of Ashford, I believe is her name, Margaret of Ashbury, who has the desire in the 14th century to write her life story, which doesn't sound like much, except of course in the 14th century you couldn't do that if you were a woman, and so she has to hire a scribe to help her. And she goes through a few horrible examples and eventually alights on Brother Gregory, a Carthusian, who needs the work and who agrees to help her. And from that starting point, we learn her story in installments as she tells it to him and he writes it up. And we also see their story unfold. And it turns out not only that their story is wonderful to read, but that her own story is remarkable. It's not just that this is a vehicle by which the author gets to tell us a typical story about a widow in the 14th century. She's exceptional, almost supernatural. And I remember this being extremely touching. I think this author only wrote a handful of historical novels. I've never seen any of the others, but I read this a few times. And I saw it and just thought, oh, you're kidding me. nice, beautiful hardcover that's as new as the day it was sold. Gladly worth a reread. Gladly. And then the last thing for this Brattle haul is a Scribner Illustrated edition. I love those. I have a small amount of them on the shelf. They're almost always the version of the book that I want. I don't think at the moment that I have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is insane because it was the Scribner Illustrated 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Wyeth illustrations that made me fall in love with that book. I read that my original copy of that thing until it fell apart. And I know that I've had copies of that since, but not anytime recently. No, but this one is also a favorite. It's not anywhere near nothing. Very little is in the same category as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for me. But this is close. This is The Boys King Arthur, with illustrations by N.C. Wyeth. There is the end papers. And you've got, I believe the first picture, yes, is a very somber King Arthur. This is Sidney Lanier, who wrote this book in 1880. And then it was repurposed with the Wyeth illustrations in 1920, I think, and given the name The Boys King Arthur. And this is just Lanier's retelling and softening and gentling and excerpting of Malory, of Le Morte d'Arthur. And It's delightful. Obviously, it's delightful. Let me see if we can get you another picture. Yes, there we go. I am Sir Lancelot du Lac, King Ban's son of Benwick, and the Knight of the Round Table. I know this volume. I have read this volume many, many times. Like many other people, this was my introduction to the stories of King Arthur. And you move on from there. I think for a certain generation, 99% of that generation encountered Mallory through this book and then went on to read Mallory itself, and other things, other adaptations. And this, I grab these Scribner Illustrated editions whenever I find them. I can pine for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but I will take what I can find, and this one was right there. So, it'd be a happy thing to reread. It's on my mind because of, this thing, which was just on the Library Tour of Doom, John Steinbeck's version of Mallory. And these things you wouldn't think it, but these things very much go together. They are very much of a type, and I would be willing to bet money. There's no one around to confirm or deny, but I'd be willing to bet money that Steinbeck first encountered Mallory through this book too, and that caused the bug that so many 20th century writers had. That gave them the bug to someday, somewhere down the line, write their own King Arthur book. I'd be willing to bet that's true. But one way or another, I was very happy to find this, and that was my Brattle trip. It wasn't really planned, wasn't really expected, don't know when it'll happen again, but the goal here with the Brattle is always to find keepers, and I think there are quite a few in this. So we have the Boys King Arthur, Scribner Illustrated. I will reread it and then put it on the shelf. I'll make room, put it on the shelf with the others. Then A Vision of Light. How fantastic. A really moving historical novel that I never expected to find again, much less in a hardcover. Then Nothing If Not Critical, which will come directly into this room, just to replace... It's a volume I already know I love and use, so I will just replace the paperback. Then Witness to the Truth, Christ and His Interpreters, by Edith Hamilton. That will also certainly come into this room. Bookmans Pleasure, by Holbrook Jackson, who was the last of the Bookmen and everybody's bookish friend. Wrote a lot of other books, hoping that more of them turn up. Then Devices and Desires, by the great P.D. James. Largely viewed as her greatest novel. I don't think I'd find many dissenters from that claim. Be a joy to reread it for March Mystery Madness. Then Spies and Intrigues, E. Phillips Oppenheim, an omnibus of E. Phillips Oppenheim, just a bit after I mentioned him on this channel. And finally, Death Cap, an Inspector Rudd mystery. I don't know anything about those at all. One of the great things about the mass market paperback mysteries at the Brattle is that you can just take your chances. You can just experiment all over the place, see who you like and who you don't like. Found a lot of good mystery writers that way. But we'll be talking a lot more about mysteries next month. In the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.